Then switching gears a little bit, I know you have your own website, Engineering Our Future. Can you talk a little bit on how you started that and what you're doing with that platform?
Yeah, so Engineer Future really started as a podcast in 2020. I have always really wanted to do a podcast for some reason. Maybe it was kind of the time it was back then, but I've been volunteering with ASE for a long time, and I usually get questions from international students mainly on how to come to the US, how to apply for jobs, how to craft a resume, all these things that we are not really taught in school. And I just thought it would be interesting to have a platform where I can talk to other engineers that I have figured out and learn from them. And honestly, I was learning as much as anyone else listening to the podcast. So it was kind of a win-win for everyone. Um, I started in 2020. In 2021 is kind of when I started to get a little more serious on it. And the website came to be a little better. I started doing some courses to prepare for the PE and the FE exam, just based on my experience. And some things kind of pop from there, some coaching and some other stuff. But mainly has been a way for me to share what I'm learning, talk with other engineers, and hopefully just share some of this information that I think is really cool to share with others, how career development works. I'm sure in 5-10 years I'll be talking about other things as my career progresses. And I think that's kind of why I wanted to name it Engineering Our Future, because I am kind of part of the process of learning this as well. I'm not trying to help other people to do it themselves. It's just sharing my experience, talk with other people, and hopefully everyone as a community can grow together.
Yeah, no, because that's what I love about talking to people, and I reach out to everyone in the AEC industry. So I love learning. Like, I've learned so much on being a bridge engineer that a year ago I probably would have had no idea I was going to be talking to you. So
Yeah, and the best part is when I mean, you probably have noticed this. You're sitting in your office, your bedroom, wherever you record your podcast and everything. You record something you think is great, you put it out, people listen to it, but you never really hear much beyond that. And sometimes I feel lonely. And when I started going back to conferences, it was really cool when people would approach me like, "Oh, hey, I listened to your podcast. It's pretty cool. I listened to this episode and really found it interesting. Here's what I learned." I'm like, okay, I feel like isolated, but at the same time,
yeah,
when I go to these places, I meet people that listen to the podcast and enjoy it. And that's really the best feeling you can get when you're doing something like this.
yeah, no, I 100% agree because, I'm in my office, but it's not until I go out to different industry events and like locally people know who I am. But I was at a conference up in Boston and they were like, "Oh, you're the dino girl." And I'm like, "Oh, marketing works. Like, everybody knows me for my dinosaur guy, so it works for me." But then finding out like conversations, I did a series on my YouTube channel, What an Architect Does, based on different design phases. And I actually had product reps reach out to me and say, "Thank you. This is actually really helpful so we can understand how you work." And I'm like, "Oh, I thought I was teaching like students in architecture on what we do, and not knowing how many different facets and other people discover it is kind of fun, but you
That's
never know."
the beauty of just putting information out there. You never know who you're gonna reach, and honestly, the opportunities that come with it, it's a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, and meeting people around the country, I think, is probably the other part of podcasting that's been really fun. And just, I've talked to people in a number of different states.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, one of the things that I tell students is just growing the network and making sure you're connecting with other people. And the amount of people I know through the podcast, because I was honestly a little afraid, but not too afraid to ask them to come to the podcast, has been amazing. And I still stay in touch with a lot of people that I have interviewed. When I go to conferences, people know that I have the podcast and they try to share with other people at the conference. I've been invited to be part of committees. I was invited to go to a conference last year for the podcast. Things are the things that open for you when you start sharing that information and just being more out there talking to people. And you don't have to have a podcast to talk to someone on LinkedIn and network and everything. But if you do it more, you're going to start expanding the network, and you never know when you're going to need it. Even if they're outside your industry, you never know when that person can help you find your next job, your next connection, help you in something in your career. So I enjoy networking as much as an engineer can enjoy it, I should say. I am very introverted still, but I understand the purpose and the benefit of doing some good networking.
Yeah, or even just being a guest on a podcast, or if there's someone that I talk to that's fascinating or that you talk to, you can always reach out to either one of us and we can give you their contact information. Everyone I've had on has just been very open. If anybody wants to ask any additional questions or find out more, they've all been open books to help somebody find their path.
Yeah, and I've had people come back to the podcast. I met some great friends through it, and just the other day I was talking with a guy called Jeff Perry. I don't know if you've seen him on LinkedIn. He just released a book called Intentional Engineering. I think I had it somewhere here. I was reading it the other day. He sent me a copy. We chatted about it. We had a lot of fun, and I met him through LinkedIn and see him on LinkedIn, ask him to call to the podcast. I've been on his podcast. He's been on mine, I think 2 or 3 times at this point. But that's how you create those connections. You just talk to people, and honestly, just being interested in what others are doing as well. Like I'm not the greatest communicator. I don't know. Public speaking is probably not my thing, even though I have been doing a podcast for a few years now and it got a lot better. But I can tell you who in the industry is a great public speaker, who has a lot of skills in that, and I can go talk to them and learn more about that specific skill if I'm trying to learn something.
Check out the full discussion from this bite of advice here. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more mentorDINO content.